What's up, guys? So I get a lot of questions very often about living here in Dominican Republic. And one of the things that I always hear when people describe Dominican Republic or they ask about it, they typically associate it with being a third world country. And I always push back on that idea that Dominican Republic is a third world country. Now, there are some areas that are very impoverished, but the country as a whole is not a third world country. And the reason I say that is because outside of one particular factor, which is poverty, I don't see anything else that connects Dominican Republic to a third world country. But when I look at the country that I came from, there are many factors about what's happening in that country currently today that can be associated with a third world country. So the question is the United States of America now a third world country? Now, I know it sounds dramatic, but a lot more people are asking this question out loud. And I'm not asking this question, nor do I think people are asking this question because they hate the country, but because the reality they're living in no longer matches the version of America that they were sold. And as far as I can remember, I'm talking about decades and decades, the United States stood as the beacon of prosperity, democracy, and opportunity. We were considered a first world nation and a global superpower. But if you look closer and beneath the surface, some cracks are starting to show. Is America still the land of the free, the home of the brave, or is it spiraling out of control to something that's more unsettling? Before, a question that no one would ever even think to ask has everybody now whispering. Is the United States now becoming a third world country? Today, I want to break down 6 real issues. And when you line all 6 of these issues up, it paints a very, very different picture of the greatest country in the world. Let's start with immigration. Yes, our borders, the most visible thing that's happening right now. For years, the United States has prided itself as being a nation of immigrants. But now we have masked ICE agents storming homes, detaining people in front of their kids and loading them in unmarked vans. While they claim being masked up like that is for their safety and security, but for many, it seems like a tactic they're using just so they can avoid accountability. You see tactics like this used in nations where civil liberties are second to state power. This tension around the immigration issue isn't new, but the imagery we're seeing surrounding immigration evokes a totally different nation. We've seen stories where green card holders or asylum seekers are being detained for no apparent reason. Children are being placed in overcrowded detention centers. Families are being torn apart without legal recourse. A very stark contrast of a welcoming America that was once projected. This isn't law enforcement. This is fear enforcement, and it's happening in plain sight. In many developing countries where authorities operate with this type of force, with no transparency, no oversight, it's a red flag. But in America, it's become normalized. And this tension around immigration is not just a policy issue, it's a moral and human rights crisis. And the US is starting to look like those same regimes that they used to criticize in the past for this same type of behavior. Do I believe something needs to be done at the border? Absolutely. Do I have the answers to our immigration issues? Absolutely not. I'm just asking a question. But the imagery we are seeing is not a good look. So now let's move on to politics. America used to stand as the beacon of democratic stability, but now we're watching that baby crumble in real time. Republicans and Democrats are no longer disagreeing. Matter of fact, they are at war with each other. No compromise, no unity, just constant power grabs and performative outrage on both sides. And then you have leaders with these dictator-type tendencies undermining elections, threatening to jail their political opponents, and attempting to rewrite the rules of democracy. And guys, we've seen this all before in our history books, where leaders slowly consolidate power. They weaken institutions, they silence their critics. This isn't Russia. This isn't Venezuela. This is the United States of America. And the division is not just in Washington, it's everywhere. Families splitting over politics, communities are hostile with one another, friends fighting over politics, and then you have the media that fuels this whole fire. Americans used to unite under one shared creed, but now we no longer look at each other as fellow citizens. We look at each other as enemies. This deep-seated political instability, this tribalism, this is not what a healthy democracy looks like. That's what a fragile system on the edge looks like. Let's move on to our third point. If you walk the streets of any major city in the United States, you're going to see another harsh reality, and that's the surge in homelessness. Tent cities, individuals and families without shelter. This is an indictment on a nation's ability to take care of its own citizens. Homelessness in America has skyrocketed, and we're no longer talking about a few cities anymore. This is national. From LA to New York, from Atlanta to Denver, entire blocks have become encampments. People are living in tents, they're under bridges, they're living in their cars, and they range from veterans to single moms to teenagers. In many third world countries, a large scale of homelessness is a sign of economic breakdown and government failure. But again, in the United States, they've normalized it. The economic promise of the American dream is starting to feel out of reach for a large portion of the population. So while they build these luxury high rises and billion-dollar tech campuses, many people can't even afford their rent. And wages have not even kept up with inflation. And there is no federal safety net strong enough to stop you from falling. This isn't just a housing crisis. It's a humanity crisis. If a country this wealthy cannot shelter its citizens, what does that say about the values of the country or its stability? So let's move on to point number 4. And that point is violence. Not just isolated incidents, but an epidemic, particularly gun violence. America has a gun problem, period. This isn't about right and left, so don't get in my comments talking about a Republican or Democrat. This is about daily trauma of living in a place where gun violence is just common that we're numb to it. Kids do active shooter drills. When I was going to school, we were doing fire drills. These mass shootings tend to happen at schools, malls, churches, grocery stores, and festivals. And we've passed the point of if it's going to happen again. We're at the point of when it's going to happen. Compare this to other developing countries. One single incident of a mass shooting often leads to some type of gun reform. But in the US, you know what we do? We just move on to the next news cycle. With thousands and thousands of mass shootings recorded yearly and living in this constant state of anxiety, one must ask themselves, how can a developed country like America be so unable to protect its own citizens from internal threats, mainly from each other? And listen, no matter how much the United States normalizes this, it is not normal. Don't get numb to that. Mass shootings is not business as usual in other countries. In any other country, this level of unchecked violence would be seen as a failure by the government and a threat to national security. This is an indicator of a societal breakdown. So let's move on to number 5, the economy. On paper, the U.S. economy looks strong, but it's built on shaky ground. Inflation is squeezing the middle class, and basic necessities like rent, food, healthcare, is all becoming unaffordable. And to make it all worse, we escalate this tariff war with major global powers, disrupting supply chains and increasing the cost of goods that Americans rely on. And I understand it's meant to protect domestic industries, but the toothpaste is already out of the tube. You can't put it back in there. And all it does is create uncertainty across international markets. Businesses struggle, prices continue to rise, and the threat of an unstable economy, it's looming. When a nation's economic future is so reliant on unpredictable political maneuvers, can it really claim long-term prosperity? So what does that mean for American people? Higher costs, layoffs, and uncertainty. So while Wall Street is over there playing games, Main Street is struggling. And as the gap widens between the rich and the poor, with no economic social net and a trade war on his hands, that's the type of volatility you expect in a fragile developing country, not the United States of America. So now let's move on to number 6, and that's the unraveling of the American family structure. We have now entered into a time where family is no longer sacred. is politicized, commodified, and in so many ways is under attack. Marriage rates are at historic lows. Rising divorce rates, single-parent households are now the norm in many communities. Parents are working 2 to 3 jobs and they still can't afford health care. Kids are being raised by their screens in schools rather than their families. And there is an increasing confusion and division on what values that we should teach our kids and who should be in control of those conversations. But in the name of progress, we've weakened these pillars that kept generations grounded: faith, family, and community. Now in the place of that is isolation, dependency, and division. And when the family falls apart, so does society. And when that breakdown becomes so widespread, there's no amount of money and no military effort that's gonna be able to fix it. This is a sign of deep instability. Now I know I said 6 factors, but I'm gonna add one more factor that I think that we can add into this equation. And this one is more subtle, it's deeply impactful, it's concerning, and it's the perceived attack on masculinity. Men are starting to feel adrift, traditional roles are being questioned, and our ideas are being challenged. Now, I do believe progress towards gender equality is essential, but the discourse has inadvertently left a void, contributing feelings of aimlessness, anger, and a search for belonging. A strong society needs healthy, contributing individuals of all genders, but if a significant portion of the male population feels disenfranchised, those consequences, they're gonna ripple outward. So here are my closing thoughts. Again, I'm just asking a question. Is America becoming a third world country, or is it already a third world country? You let me know. But all the indicators we explored, the forced policing, political chaos, homelessness, unchecked violence, economic fragility, the breakdown of family structure, and the attack on masculinity, you start to see a pattern. And more importantly, you start to feel it. And that's why more and more people are deciding to look elsewhere to live outside the United States, because people are feeling it. I felt it. The US was starting to feel more like the countries that it criticized. And the people, the citizens, are paying the price, not the billionaires. It's the everyday folk that just want to live, raise their family, and feel safe. You don't have to agree with everything I said, but if you haven't felt this shift and that life in America is starting to feel harder, more hostile, and less hopeful, then you're being willfully ignorant, I must say. People are tired, they're anxious, they're distrustful, and they're not just questioning the government anymore, they're questioning the system itself. And when you ask these questions, people want to make it seem like you're crazy or you're being ungrateful. But when in reality, you're just seeing what's going on. You deserve peace, you deserve stability, you deserve a life where your kids are safe, your work is valued, and your family can thrive. Whether that means pushing for change in the US or searching for another life abroad, that's your call. But don't let anyone shame you for asking this question, because the country that you and I grew up believing in may not be the one that you're currently living in anymore. So guys, remember, always keep your goals at the forefront of your mind. Always live in the present, because that's the only way you're gonna live your best life. And I'm out. Peace.
Je bent God my best life, yeah. Je bent God my best life, yeah. Something you and me, oh. Je bent God my best life, yeah. Jumping, flexing,